Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters and debunkers. I would just like to share some thoughts in responses to assumptions such as you think you're special, or you think you know something special, or you want to feel special. These are the kinds of comments that you might see as accusations made against flat earthers or truth seekers in general, trying to tell the world how the world is. But of course, this is based on what kind of knowledge? Is it something that's written down in a book? Is it something that we've been handed down historically by religions or cultures? Not at all. In fact, it's this realization that we are, of course, individuals in the sense that every one of us, every single one of us has some unique skill or ability or a particular thought process or imagination. But these are all aspects of the mind or different physical attributes. But essentially, we are all human, and so we all are susceptible to very similar fundamental things that affect us and ultimately divide us. And these are related to culture or religion. These are divisive in their very nature, but they're all thoughts and beliefs of which humans all have very similar attachments. Whether you have some kind of religion or culture that you are in, our mind will be a particular way. It will literally be programmed a certain way, to think a certain way, or to believe certain things, to interpret certain actions or verbalizations in a certain way, something that's meaningful within the context of the culture that we have been brought up in. So we are programmed, in a sense, by our culture. And for the most part, we are unaware of this. We go through life responding and reacting to things mostly based on our cultural upbringing and the mindset that comes with that. And so on this truth-seeking journey, one has a realization that as an individual, yes, we have certain unique properties, physical and mental, but we also share very similar traits with the rest of humanity. And so it's having that awareness of what's going on within our thoughts, or having the awareness of our thought patterns and processes due to our individual unique experiences. We then become aware that even though each person, each individual is having a very unique experience, we are all fundamentally affected by the same influences of ego or thought. And it is thought that divides people, because everything that we are divided by is an abstract concept. We know that we are not divided by skin color, really. We are not divided by culture, really. These are things that can influence others' perception of us or our perception of ourselves because of thought processes. So there's nothing special about someone who realizes or sees this, but what happens when we see that we are all one, we really are all connected, because we all suffer in very similar ways. Rich, poor, healthy, sick. We all experience various forms of suffering, such as doubt, anger, hate, love, frustration, boredom. These are traits that affect all of us, every single one of us. So in that sense, we have this realization that we are one. I am you and you are me. Whether one is angelic in their nature and the other is murderous in their nature, we are all affected by these thought processes and cultural imprints that can take our lives in an infinite possible number of directions. So it matters not, it's inconsequential one's doctorates or standing in society or affiliation with people or even products, or a pauper, a taxi driver, a lord. We are all human. And so when we see that and we are able to observe it for what it is and pay attention, then of course there is this immense feeling of responsibility that comes with that realization. It's not about feeling special. It's about this realization that, oh my goodness, I am responsible for everything I think and do. All my actions are my own doing. Nobody else's. Of course, we might find that, there are situations that arise all the time that cause us to react in a certain way. And that is usually what we might call instinctive, but it's not instinctive. It's usually programmed, the way we react. And then, of course, that creates division, usually. And so that becomes perpetual. The more we think about things, the more fractured everything becomes, the more detail there is, and thus there is more division. There is less oneness. There is less flexibility. It becomes more and more rigid. And so what we have when it comes to models and abstract concepts about who we are and where we are, it becomes immensely fractured and divisive, when the reality is that we become so focused on these details that we don't see the big picture, that we are all human and we are all responsible for ourselves and each other. But we can't do anything for humanity until we recognize and understand and resolve the problems that we experience personally in our own minds. And so, of course, the more one understands the mind, then the more one understands the collective problems that humanity has and we are facing. And of course we seem to be going down a road that is eternally tyrannical, because we have people so focused on these small little details that have been blown out of all proportion to affect all of us in many aspects of our lives because of new rules and regulations and new preventative measures and people that are just thinking too much about one thing, and as a consequence so many things get ignored and left behind, and the whole becomes even more fractured and divisive. And this is the thing, let me try to kind of put this a bit more clearly. For anyone who has some kind of awakening experience, they realize the extent of the illusion and the lies that we are surrounded by, and then realize that this is just the way humans are, because we are always suffering from these distractions of the illusions and the thoughts that we create in our minds. Once we see that and we feel compelled, we feel this immense responsibility, because we understand that, again, we are responsible for everything that comes about. No one else. It's all on us. It's our responsibility. And this is the weight of the realization. This is the most frightening thing about the realization, is that you suddenly realize that it is nobody's fault, the situation that you are in. Can't be pointing fingers at anyone. We just have to accept what has passed and is, and then understand our current outlook on ourselves and the rest of humanity. So then we have this we are consumed with this desire to do something. Now that we have this knowledge, this is a knowledge or a wisdom that comes, is a form of knowing that comes when you have realized that we are constantly distracted by our thoughts, and of course the thoughts that control all other individuals. Everyone's being controlled by their thoughts rather than consciousness, rather than this knowledge that we are all the same. Really, we are all suffering from the same or very similar things, regardless of our the status quo of our life at this time. We all suffer from these mental processes. So you see that. We see that we are all human. We are all one. And we can see how to solve the problem if only everyone can just see the same thing. Have this understanding, awareness that we are largely controlled by our thoughts. Our behaviors are not instinctive. They are pre-programmed because of our thoughts. And then we react and we go off in a particular direction because of that initial reaction. And if we don't have the awareness of why or how we react to certain things, then we become more and more lost in the infinite detail at which we can bury ourselves into with such narrow focus that is destructive and divisive. So then, this is why people are coming out with videos all the time and trying to explain things, try to show things the way they see it so they can help understand. It's all about trying to share rather than trying to dictate that anything is a particular way. And this is especially true when it comes to models and concepts, because there's lots of people saying should and shouldn't and would and ifs, and there are no ifs and woulds and shoulds. There just is. And the way it is the way it is. And the way we are is the way we are. And when we accept those things and really see them and really feel that unity, then the division melts away. The conflict that arises from division melts away. And I'm sure I'm speaking in this for a lot of people with this desire to share what we are finding out and discovering about ourselves and about humanity along the way, about the way we see the world, what we can only really know about our existence compared to all the myriad of concepts that we are presented with, especially when it comes to the origins of us, the universe. Nobody knows, and we have to accept that. So what do you do? What do you do? Then you go through this process, this kind of vigilante process. Once you have this awareness and you feel this responsibility, then you feel this desire to just change people's minds, and then we get into the territory of converting people. You see, then we become religious zealots for a while, attempting to convert others to our way of thinking. But of course, ultimately what we're trying to say is stop thinking. Don't think in terms of concepts or abstract ideas. Understand that thought is the culprit in creating all of these divisions, cultural or whatever it may be, racial, social, hierarchy. All these things are thoughts, politics, everything that runs our lives has been born from thoughts. Attempts to do something, attempts to progress. And so, of course, we come to this conflict of understanding where scientific progressing in science is wonderful. There are many wonderful things that are being done to progress technologically, but a scientific approach in the academic sense will never give us the answers to those questions about how we resolve the fundamental issues of division. Wouldn't it be wonderful if an understanding of science brings about peace on Earth? Well, the thing is, we have to understand the science of the mind. The way the mind works is a science, but it's really not that difficult, because it is really just that understanding that thought is a controller, and it often controls us when it should be the other way around. Once we have that awareness that thought is what makes up the ego and all these other things that kind of contribute to us having a certain personality or persona and being someone. And that becomes thoughts in our own minds, in other people's minds, and of course their own individual aspect will no two people will consider someone else in the same way. They will always have their own unique thoughts or beliefs about someone else or about themselves. And so after the vigilante stage, once there is this further acceptance of the fact that a lot of people you might interact with are not interested in being aware or becoming aware of the difference between consciousness and thoughts, or why it should make any difference to making progress in life. Then you become less vigilante, I suppose, less or more surrendering more to the understanding that the best way to make a difference is simply to continue the path of self-improvement and detachment from these thought processes, or constant awareness, practicing the awareness, really. The awareness of how we are divided when really we are one. That's all any of us can ever do, and then we are leading a life that is based, it's more in tune, it's less polluted with thoughts. So there's nothing special about a truth seeker who sees humanity for what we are. Yes, there's something different and distinct because they now operate, or maybe have always operated, on a different frequency. More free from the programming that we are most often subjected to. So there are no alternative explanations that come forth from this esoteric realization. It's more of an acceptance that whenever we try to model or label or interpret something, then we are creating division. We are creating conflict. We are not seeing it as a whole. Of course, the thought experiments of Einstein, Newton, Galileo, and all the others that have attempted to describe reality in a single formula, of course, could be argued that they are attempting to see the whole. And in that sense, given this elevated godlike status, because they have managed to sum it all up. But what they do is sum it all up in a very fundamental law, or observation, or interpretation of nature, or human nature. And from that, any possible explanation can be made, or assumptions from these fundamental observations. You know, the interpretation of an observation will become divisive, whether you say the sun sets because it's going further away from us, or because it's the earth rolling away. It's always a matter of interpretation. Does it explain the whole? No, of course not. It doesn't. But we also understand that there is, while there are a multitude of interpretations that one can make of something that we observe in reality, or various conclusions that we might want to draw or hypothesize, we never really know the whole picture, and we can never really take the whole picture into account. You see what I'm saying? The more we try to discuss something, the more detail we try to go into, the more divided we become. But the more we try to just create one single answer or solution, doesn't solve anything, doesn't give us any further answers anyway. It's just a case of understanding that that's the way it is. The one can be divided into an infinite number of parts, and it still doesn't make any difference to the fundamentals. So we are all fundamentally connected as humans. And of course, in a larger sense, we are connected to nature. We're connected to the trees and the birds and the earth. That's what we are connected to. That's what we are part of. And this universal consciousness and yes, each and every one of us has a role to play as an individual. But for the best performance, we have to learn to be detached from all the thought processes and emotions that surround whatever goal or path one might have. And so it never stops. There is no final answer here. It's an unending quest, isn't it? The quest for truth. And we will find many answers, but there has to be a time of suffering. There has to be a time in which we are able to reflect. So this goes back to the realization that we are all humans and we can all be influenced by lies and illusions, and then once we can see through that, we can see how everyone else is being carried along unconsciously by the lies and the illusions that they are following, whether it's the money or the mortgage or these things which are they in a sense they are lost. They might feel they have some direction, but of course they're also getting lost and more divided in this sense of self, or this sole focus on the self. So once one has had this realization, then yes, one feels separate and unique in a way, and maybe you could say a bit special, or at least feels that they are in possession of something, i.e. knowledge, that must be shared, and with benevolent intention is put out there. Hey, I want to just, you should see, if only you could see the world this way, if you only you could see that this is how we got into this mess. And of course, that if someone can see it like you have seen it, then they can become free. You want to free people. You want them to be free of suffering. And so we understand when people come at us with attempts to damage us or injure us with words, then that's funny, because they're doing so while being attached and entrapped by their ego, thinking that a battle of egos and winning that battle will achieve some kind of success. But no, that's just futile, because you've already gone through that and you've realized that these conflicts, again, are created by ourselves, not by anyone else. It's not anyone's fault. So when someone is attacking us, we know that they are still not at peace in their own minds. They still have conflicts and division within their own mind. They haven't reached that point of really questioning or observing what they are doing. And they might well be doing it deliberately because they know that they can inflict pain, but that's only from their own perspective, in which they would feel pain because they are living a life based on that is influenced by the ego and all the other accolades and achievements that we are given as an illusion to aim for. So, we understand that they are suffering. So when someone comes at you and they're attacking you and ridiculing and being childish, then they are the one that's still suffering. And so, of course, you have the choice. You have the ability already to either get involved consciously or not get involved consciously, rather than unconsciously getting involved in a dispute and an argument and actually being hurt by the pain that they intended to inflict on you, whereas you don't even have to feel any pain if you are not attached to the battle of egos that will take place ultimately in these situations. So we can start making conscious decisions about our reactions rather than reacting based on pre-programmed thoughts. And this is what it's all about. This is what all this truth-seeking is about. It's understood. Flat Earth is just a simple understanding of how our five sense reality, or our sixth sense even, which is the collection of everything that we experience, has been polluted with these illusions. And of course we then come to understand how easy it is to be led astray by all the other aspects of society, modern society: money, education, fame, fortune, prestige, what have you, all of this, yeah? This is all illusion. But of course we realize that most of us spend our lives being dragged around by this illusion unconsciously. Whereas when you're conscious of it, you can start to really change yourself. And it's in that way that you will change humanity as a whole, because again, we are all one. So, but this is not by necessarily preaching or strategizing or thinking too much about trying to, in inverted commas, convert people. The only thing that people should be converted from is the attachment to thoughts, and to be converted to having a totally open, unprejudiced mind, allowing for true scientific inquiry to take place, at which point we then realize the essence of humanity. The oneness that is divided by our own thought processes and our own egos. So we suffer in that sense. We are burdened with this extra layer of suffering that perhaps animals don't have. Doesn't make animals less conscious, but animals are not necessarily riddled with emotions such as guilt or worrying about the future. They are very much in the present, and of course they might get bored, they might get frustrated, and they don't have the presence of mind sometimes to to see how they're getting themselves into a bad situation, possibly. But at the same time, they lack the same. They don't experience the same kind of suffering. I'm thinking of a dog or a cat, that doesn't experience the same kind of suffering that we experience on that level of thought, because they wouldn't appear to be consumed, as I said, with guilt. You can make a dog feel guilty for chewing up the sofa by your tone of voice, and it knows it's in trouble. But the dog won't feel any guilt without you telling the dog that it's supposed to feel guilty by being stern with it. Yeah, so that's an ideal kind of scenario of how one can program sentient beings to respond and react in a certain way. So we're not special, us so-called flat earthers, truth seekers, just truth seekers that realize that the earth is not a spinning ball. We're on a realm at which we don't have any other answers apart from that, because we don't have any, and there is no need for any other explanations. They mean nothing. They are just thoughts, and they are divisive. Explain this, explain that. It's just divisive. It doesn't help anyone, because then you're trying to imply something as a fact, which is only a concept. It's not a concept because of any knowledge. It's not built on anything but ideas. And if only we could get to that point collectively as humanity, if we could get to that point where we are not so judgmental, we have more awareness of how easily we sink into conflict with ourselves, because that's the thing, you see, there's these to really truly see and understand the conflicts that we see going on around the world between different nations. We just have to see and observe the conflict that happens within us, within our own spirit, between our egos and our minds and consciousness. Because once we see that our thoughts pollute consciousness, or maybe they make things happen in reality, they manifest. Our thoughts manifest as actions, as speech, as physical things in the tangible world. We literally create from our thoughts. So of course our thoughts are a good thing. There's nothing wrong with thought, but it's allowing the thoughts to ride on the stream of consciousness rather than trying to create a blockade for the stream of consciousness. So, world peace is something that happens inside, and it is still an individual journey. And only as individuals can we have the kind of peace that comes with the understanding of what's really going on inside our minds and our hearts and our heads. That's the thing. Attempting to put these thoughts and things and emotions somewhere within our physical body is also problematic, because they don't necessarily happen in the mind. They are a oneness. They are, a feeling of guilt or fear especially will consume our entire being and our body physically as well. It becomes it manifests physically, doesn't it? It's sweating, it's tension, it's a high raised heartbeat and blood pressure. These are all things that are associated with fear. So of course that's destructive as well for our being. It affects our minds. Our minds race, and we get all bogged down with detail and scenarios. What if? Yeah, it's all down to these thoughts. So when we see that, when we can see the conflicts that arise within ourselves, and we realize that we can control our thoughts, or at least just simply by observing them, we then have better control of them because they are being watched. And so the thoughts become aware of the watcher, and so they become more civilized, more rational, more better processed and arranged. And so we see things more clearly because there's an awareness of the thought process that's going along, rather than being just carried along by this thought process. You see? So you have to see that within yourself first, and you have to start training the monkey mind in order for that to spread out and become part of the singular consciousness that's driving humanity. So it just comes down to, that. So what I'm saying really in summary is that there's this awakening process, and then of course there is this kind of religiously zealotous period as well of trying to impress this knowledge on everyone, and then there is a realization that you can't do that. Not everyone is ready. Everyone is on a different path. They have to have certain experiences before they can start thinking about things. Yeah, we have to go through a process of suffering and then asking questions of ourselves, and why am I like this? How can I get out of this thought pattern, whether it's depression or anxiety or a feeling of not being successful, or whatever it might be, disappointment with life. We have to go through these things, so we might have to have had certain experiences, and they become. Well, this is the thing. Our past experiences, if we have attachment to them, then we kind of become this thing or entity with a very rigid. Okay, this is me. This is what I am. I'm an astronaut. I'm a pilot. I'm a teacher. I'm a whatever. Yeah, but no, they're just labels. We ultimately have to try and abandon labels, become completely detached from labels, and that is a work in progress for any individual ever, always. So, nobody's special here. We're all special. Because we do all have a huge, massive responsibility for ourselves, our own actions, our own thoughts, our own deeds, our own speech, and how that affects everyone else. Yeah, there is a huge responsibility. And yes, it's a burden and it's frightening, but then you come to embrace it as a wild and wonderful journey that can take us to some very magical places. The future is not written. It is entirely up to us. That is the wonderful thing about it. Each of us has a unique path to follow, and maybe an infinite number of possible paths we could follow in any given lifetime, depending on the decisions we make at any certain time. And the decisions we make at any point in time will depend on our awareness at that time, our attention to the big picture at the time. If we are too focused on one particular aspect, then we'll end up making irrational decisions that have negative impacts on other aspects of the whole. Whereas if we are more attentive to the whole picture and less distracted by being too focused on one thing, then we'll see things as they are without the attachment, and we will be able to progress without conflict, without division. It's the ultimate goal, isn't it? To bring about a lack of division. And that doesn't mean sameness. That means we celebrate and we embrace the uniqueness of every individual comprising the whole. the universe expressing itself or herself in all these infinite ways, through humanity, through nature, through a flower, through fungi, through you. It's all happening all at once. And there is nothing else but now. Nothing else. No attachment to the past and what we believed or the way we labelled things. No predictions, no explanations about the future. No attempts to even explain the beginning and the end. It's pointless. It's a distraction from the now. And the now is a very magical thing that strangely remains almost completely obscured for most of our lives, from birth until death, because of the material world and the illusionary world that we are born into. We are born into illusion, Maya. Thank you very much.